Faculty members to get populated the front seats, The students also and other participants should try to come a little bit in the front so that I let the front seats not be empty. Very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 29th session of Meeting of Minds. As you all know, that this flagship program of ITM University was conceived and organized to provide a common platform for you to debate, discuss, and reflect on various complicated issues or various fascinating and interesting issues that encounter our life. Many times we don't find clear-cut answers, but then we dwell upon those topics in our minds and always try to search some concrete solution to those kind of intriguing problems. During the previous Meeting of Mind sessions, we have covered very diverse subjects, such as we started with the concept of time, then discuss about the colors in human life, unweaving the rainbow. We also had a topic on Shabd, word, and how powerful a word could be. We discussed about the energy, the cosmos, Big Bang theory, making of God, melody and mind. We also discussed that the India through the eyes of Indian painters. So we discussed about the paintings. We had a topic called motivation through the goal setting. Another topic was the nature of nature, idea of India, managing through consciousness. I'm just reminding you some of the topics that we actually covered in these sessions. The power of positive thinking, why spirit matters, the matter and consciousness, a rural manifesto. We also discussed the crisis in the agrarian sector of India, especially to discuss about the farmers' problem. And today, we have a very distinguished guest here, Professor Dr. Soni Sam George, who is going to discuss a very interesting topic on unlocking the secrets to successful human relationships. Before I call upon Professor Tony to start his deliberations, I would like to give a very brief introduction about Professor Dr. Tony Sam George. He is a professor of psychology and is a part of the core leadership team at Christ, the deemed university in Bengaluru. He is serving as the Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences and Director of the Center for Research at Christ University. In addition, he serves as a Director of Center for Academic and Professional Support and the Chief Mentor for the Praveen Kenneth Chair on Leadership. Dr. George has years of experience in developing and sustaining international collaborations with universities in Canada, the US, UK, South Africa, Southeast Asia. He is currently part of the Global Mental Health Project with the University of Western Cape and the University of Toronto. Dr. George teaches on topics related to issues surrounding access to health care and community-based interventions, along with resource utilization for optimizing health delivery. Dr. George holds a PhD in mental health from the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, and is specialized in managing care of persons with severe and chronic anxiety disorders and established social care models for persons with obsessive compulsive disorder. Dr. George's area of clinical practice is in relationship management, focusing on couples and families, children and adolescents. It's my proud privilege to invite Professor George to enlighten us with this fascinating topic. He will be making his presentation in about 30 to 40 minutes, followed by a prolonged discussion, so please participate actively in the discussion session. Professor George.
I prefer to move around a bit, so I'm using this mic. Thank you very much, Dr. Divedi, for this kind invitation, and to the management here at ITM for giving me this unique privilege to be part of what I understand is a very interesting concept in the university, to talk about topics and issues that are important to all of us in life, irrespective of the fact that we are academicians, whether we hold a PhD degree or we are just a student. It doesn't matter, because these topics are far beyond what academics or intellect can give us. These are topics that are of importance to human relationship, to human life, and we're all part of that. So thank you once again for that kind invitation, and I'm really glad to be here. Thank you also for the great hospitality that you've been offering me in the last few days. I'm going to speak this afternoon very briefly, partly from research, partly from my own clinical practice, working with couples, with families, with marriage counseling, and with young men and women who've come for clinical practice. And I'm going to tell a story about human relationships here. And I'm going to do that by probably offering to you some things that we did not know a few years ago. When I was doing my training at the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences years ago, we didn't have the knowledge that we have today. And interestingly, you've been having a conference on technological innovations yesterday and today. And we have technology to thank for helping us to understand about human relationships. Because now, if I want to understand what's happening in your brain right now, and you're sitting wherever you're sitting, and I want to figure out who's listening to me, who's not listening to me, who's thinking about going back home, or who's reflecting on something else, it's possible to do that. We couldn't do that a few years ago, but now we have the technology to do that. So if I put your head into a MRI machine, I can actually take photographs of your brain. Or if I use a functional magnetic resonance imaging, I can actually take a videograph of your brain right through this whole session. And the understanding that we have today about human relationships has been greatly enhanced by technology. And the first part of my presentation, I'll be speaking to you about some of the secrets that we did not know in the past, that we know today, and how we can use that information and knowledge to improve human relationships. Interestingly, human relationships, unlike in many other fields of life, it's hard to, like I said earlier, to get a PhD in human relationship and then be the best husband in the world, the best wife in the world, the best son in the world, the best daughter, the best boyfriend, the best girlfriend, the best brother, the best sister. It's just not possible, right? All of us here, this is an intellectual group, both students and faculty here. We're all intelligent. We are probably great in studies. We have great reading habits. But when it comes to human relationships, just a phone call from your mother upsets you. Maybe an interaction with your spouse upsets you. We've been living for many years having the same conflict over and over again. We go back home, we have the same argument, we get upset or we get disappointed, and then we come back the next day, we think it's better, but then suddenly we go over that again. Does that sound familiar? Human relationships are definitely an interesting area for all of us. But yet, there are some things that if all of us do and we do it consistently, can improve the quality of your lives and quality of our human relationships. You know, we speak about global burden of healthcare, economic burden, financial burden, and so on. And we have devised ways in which we can overcome all that. But I think relationship burden is a burden that by far for the human race has been something very difficult to manage. And I think it's becoming more difficult these years. You knew in the previous generations, if I'm the index person of discussion here, both my parents came from very large families, and their average family size was at least 9 or 10, which means they had at least 8 siblings and parents and so on. If you look at the average family size in many parts of India, you know that it's decreasing. Several of you probably in the audience come from single children yourself, so the social support and the family networks that were there earlier is much smaller and has gone through a lot of shrinkage. You know that the divorce rate in India has increased over the years. In Bangalore city, where I come from and where I've done most of my practice, we had one family court when I was doing my PhD some years back. Now we have 7 family courts, which registers 30 cases of divorce every day in all of them. So you can imagine the kind of breakdown in relationships all over the country, as is the case all over the world. And so the burden that many of us carry, we carry it over our lifetime. Sometimes there are things that we can do to reduce that burden, and that's what I hope to accomplish by speaking with all of you today. The first kind of story that I want to speak to you is the story of the human brain. Don't worry about the technicalities. I know I was told not to make this presentation too technical because this is a diverse group. But the point I want to talk about here is that today we know about the brain development much more than we knew in the past. When I was a student of psychology in the 90s, my teacher told me that the human brain grows the same way every year till you are around 16 or 17 years old and then it stops. But today we know that's not true. The human brain grows in spurts. There are critical points of time as we grow as young people, from the time we are a baby to the time that we are an adult. There are points of time where the human brain grows in spurts. Now, this is important. Let's take, for example, the age of 4 to 7 years, which is one such critical point of time. Between the ages of 4 and 7, the human brain has an accelerated growth, which means that if the young child in that age group is involved in certain interactions, certain experiences and events, that has a larger impact on him or her compared to an age where the brain is perhaps not growing at that place. Are you with me here? So these are images of the human brain to show how the grey matter and the white matter change over a period of time from the age of 5 to the age of 20. You can see from the color here from this image that there is a variation in the brain, how the brain evolves. And this is important. And if you want to understand the nature of human relationships, I think it's important for us to understand about the human brain. Do you remember as a child playing with plasticine or clay? Molding clay? All of us have probably done that. One of the most exciting activities that we used to do as children, right? And you have some mud or something you like to play. The interesting thing about plasticine or clay is that you can mold that into any kind of shape that you want to, right? There is a concept today in neuroscience called neuroplasticity. The concept is that our brains are also like plasticine or clay. So at important periods of time, the brain is constantly prone to being molded by events around us. So if you are just born and from the age of 0 to 3, in the first 3 years of your life, let's say that your parents are, let's say you come from a high noise family where parents are like shouting and arguing with each other every now and then. The child who's living in that house begins to internalize those events and begins the nervous system of that child or the neurons in the child's brain will begin to create certain connections. All right, this is how my family is. When they argue a lot, this is what I must do. I must protect myself, so I will probably avoid or I will, read a book, or I might, cry and, distract them from arguing, and then they will stop arguing and pay attention to me. These kinds of behaviors that are exhibited by children over a period of time is actually wiring the brain in a certain way. Are you with me here? This is a concept of neuroplasticity. That is why all of us have different ways in which we respond to situations. For some of you sitting in this audience, if I say that, hey, you're looking good today, you might say, thank you very much. Somebody else might say, why is he saying I'm looking good today? Or the other person might say, oh, he's saying I'm looking good today just to please me because I'm actually not looking very good today. And I'm, generally I have a poor self-image, I know people have never complimented me, why is he doing that? Maybe there's something wrong with me, he's trying to make me feel good. Why do all of us react differently to the same situation? It's because our wiring in the brain is different. And this is the first concept that I want us to keep in mind as we think about human relationship. Because the way the human brain responds to a relational situation depends to a great degree on the attachments that were created early on in life. This is the picture of the human brain, and I've tried to make it as simple as possible so that all of us can connect to it. The human brain can be said to have 3 parts. And if you take a young fetus, if you take a scan of a young fetus in the mother's womb, the biggest part of a young fetus is what is called as the reptilian brain. What you can see over there right at the bottom, which we call as the brain stem. So down there, the reptilian brain. Right, this should be actually here, the reptilian brain, the brain stem. Have you seen lizards and snakes or other reptiles? What are they always doing? You see a lizard always scanning, right? Always looking for danger. Is there danger somewhere? If it senses danger, it will run away. Right? So the reptilian brain is the center of dealing with threat. Fight, flight responses. Right? So right now we are all very intelligent people sitting here, and if there is a huge fire that starts here, none of us are going to sit down and say, let's hold a committee meeting and decide how to set out the fire. Will you do that? You're not going to do that, right? All our management techniques are going to go out of the window. You will probably scream, some of you will run out, some others will push the others and go, some people might think about putting the fire off. That's because the brain stem or the reptilian brain overrides everything else in situations of danger. Now remember, for a small child who is growing up, if there are situations in the child's life which provoke threat, for example, parents are fighting all the time, all right? Or the father is very punitive, or there is violence, or the child is viewing violence at home. The reptilian brain is very active because it sends signals to the child saying, you know what, this is a dangerous situation. You need to do something about it. Run away, freeze, do something about it. Fight or flight response. You're walking on the road, a mad dog comes running after you, you're not going to stop and say, okay, let me see if I can communicate with the dog and be friendly with the dog. You're not going to do that, right? You're going to run. That's a fight and flight response. Interestingly, the reptilian brain is the smallest part of the human brain, yet the most powerful, because in a situation of threat, the reptilian brain overtakes all other functions of the human brain. The second part of the human brain that grows or evolves after the reptilian brain is called the emotional brain. For those of you who are more tuned towards neuroscience or human physiology, you're familiar with the limbic system or the amygdala, right? All that is part of the emotional brain. The emotional brain is a seat of emotions. So when the mother cares for you and shows affection and you want her attention, that's the emotional brain that is activated. Or you see somebody and you feel affection towards that person, someone's crying in front of you and you want to empathize with that person, it's the emotional brain. Or you get angry or you're in a state of conflict, it's the emotional brain, or you feel impulsive. One of the secrets of human relationship is that for a growing up person, the emotional brain develops first and evolves fully before the next brain, which I'm going to speak about, the thinking brain. This is important for us to understand. So when you're, some of you are married, right? Well, you've seen your parents, some of you are in relationships. When there's a disturbance in your relationship, how many of you actually sit down and analyze the situation, put on your thinking hat and say, let me now sit and think why there's a disturbance. It must be this reason, this reason, this reason, and then make a very logical decision and then go and talk to your partner. You don't have to put up your hands, it's a rhetorical question. And how many of us respond impulsively and immediately and think, oh, I think you get angry at that person, or you avoid and withdraw into a shell and you move away. Now this example indicates the difference between the thinking brain and the emotional brain. In human relationships, the emotional brain has the ability to function first compared to the thinking brain. So for people who say, you must always be logical about relationships, you must always sit and analyze what you do and say to others, the human brain just does not function that way. Finally, after the age of 16, 17, 18, 19, what in neuroscience we call as a prefrontal cortex, what I have put on this slide as the thinking brain, evolves. So the thinking brain is the last part of the brain to evolve for any of us. So evolutionarily speaking and developmentally speaking, for all of us, first is our response to threat, second is our emotional brain, and finally our thinking brain. Do you get me here? So there's a sequence in which our brain evolves. And that sequence is important, and I think it tells us a story. It tells us that we as individuals, we need to be ready to face crisis. So we should have our ability to deal with the crisis. We need to be individuals who can function emotionally before we function intellectually. But for a lot of human relationships, the problem arises because we don't have an accurate understanding of how to function between the emotional brain, the reptilian brain, and the thinking brain. The story of human attachments that we have right from our childhood onwards needs to be understood in the context of how we develop and how our brain evolves. And that is the first secret that I want to speak to you about. The person that you see on the screen is a famous British psychiatrist called John Bowlby, and he spent several years interviewing mothers and children observing mothers and children across cultures in the world. He went to many countries, including India, and he looked at how mothers and children respond with each other. And he is the one who coined the term attachment. And in psychology, we call it the attachment theory. He's written some classic masterpieces. I would encourage some of you who are inclined to read the classic volume, Attachment and Loss, written by John Bowlby. One of the most important findings that he made from his research is that our early attachments always predict future attachments. I was speaking once with a lady in a class, in a marriage counseling class that I was taking for people who wanted to be lay counselors, and she told me that in her family, her parents were always in conflict, and she used to feel very vulnerable growing up as an individual, and because of that vulnerability, today she's a mother, and she goes out of her way to protect her children from any kind of violence or any kind of threat. This is an example of how our early attachments can predict future attachments. In this case, she was perhaps what we call compensating for what happened to her in her growing up years. Are you with me here? According to John Bowlby, our early attachments always predict future attachments. So if any of you are going through trouble in your relationships, one thing that might be useful for you to do is to stop looking at what is wrong with your spouse or with your partner or father or mother, but to ask yourself, have you really figured out the way you are functioning today vis-a-vis the way you are functioning in your growing up years? Right? That's an important principle to take back. Anybody who wants to have a successful human relationship needs to ask this question. Do I know why I am behaving this way? You know what all of us do in relationships? The first thing that we do when there's a problem in human relationship is to point the finger. at the other person. But what attachment theory actually tells us is, don't do that. Try and understand the way you are functioning with respect to how you were functioning early on in life. John Bowlby's student and later well-known psychologist Mary Ainsworth did interesting research called the strange situation experiment to further understand his theory. So what you did is, how many of your mothers here? Can you put up your hands? Mothers? Excellent. So I'll talk to you. You know, what Mary Ainsworth did is, she took like toddlers, 2-3 years old kids, put the kid and the mother together in a room, and then asked the mother to leave. Right? And so the child was alone in the room, and they were observing the child. After some time, they asked the mother to come back. And when the mother comes back, we look at the reaction. And this was an experiment that was done and very popular in attachment theory. So these are some of the things that happened. When the mother came back, some of the children were already very, scared and frightened. As soon as the mother left, they were like really stressed and crying and all that. And when the mother came, they just kept running back and clung on to the mother and was crying profusely. Another set of kids, they were on their own playing with toys, whether the mother was there or not, it didn't make a big difference. Mother came back also, it didn't make a big difference, the kid continued to. Then there were other children who indicated some kind of distress when the mother left, but then they continued to play with their toys. When the mother came back, they either came back to the mother and maybe hugged the mother or acknowledged the presence of the mother and then went back to play. These experiments told us that there are different ways in which all of us react to primary attachment relationships. According to Bowlby, there are two kinds of early attachments all of us can have. One is called secure attachment. The mother-child relationship in psychology is considered as a relationship of safety. Right? And one psychologist that I like a lot uses the metaphor of the hand. So if you're a father or a mother and your small child gives the hand to you and you hold the hand of your baby or a young child, the child feels a sense of safety and security. My daughter always used to sleep, whenever she sleeps, when she was a baby, she used to keep her hand either in my hand or in my wife's hand the whole night. So she'll be holding it and then she knows that she's safe. The same is true for all of us as we grow up as adults. The same sense of safety that we experience as young people, we tend to experience as we grow older. So, in simple words, some of us can have what is known as secure attachments, which does not distress us so much. So, if you're in a marriage relationship or you're in a relationships right now in your life, you can either experience a sense of safety, which means that if you have a conflict, you will still not get too distressed, you will not cling to the person, you will not pursue the person, but you will still be able to manage it, work on it positively. Or you might have what is known as an insecure attachment style. Do you remember the cartoon strip called Peanuts? Any of you? Cartoon strip called Peanuts. It was created by a Walt Disney cartoonist called Charles Schulz Sparky. And he created this character called Snoopy. And there are some great Snoopy museums around the world. He created the characters based on attachment theory. For those of you who are familiar with the cartoon strip, you would probably understand that better. What attachment theory tells us is that in every relationship there is a basic fear that we have. It's a fear of abandonment. If my partner gets angry at me, if my wife gets angry at me, if my father gets upset with me, there's a basic fear in all of us that we will be left and abandoned. Rarely it happens, right? How many of our parents actually abandoned us? Rarely. Some people actually do that. But this is a fear that we have deep within us. Right? So on one vector, you have the anxiety of abandonment, as you can see that arrow mark there. On the second vector, you will see our need to be close to our caregivers. So there are some people who feel that unless you are physically close, the child is physically close to the parents, they feel safe. The parent goes away, they kind of feel tense. I used to feel that when I was a kid, and if my parents had to travel somewhere and I was left with my older sister or with somebody else, I used to feel very disturbed because perhaps I was high on proximity seeking. And if you look at this picture here, you'll notice that there are 4 types of attachment that all of us can be divided into. One is called the fearful attachment. The example given there is Charlie Brown, who was actually the representation of the author himself. That is called the fearful attachment. People in a fearful attachment always worried and afraid if there is something going wrong in the relationship. So fear is a predominant emotion. I'm afraid, I'm anxious, I'm afraid about what might happen, I'm afraid there will be abandoned and so on. So the fear constantly drives the way you function in a relationship. There are others who are always preoccupied. What will happen to me? What will he say? Is he going to be upset with me? When I reach home, is my wife going to argue with me again? What is my father going to say? What is my mother? What is my teacher going to say? It's preoccupation. You get that? The mind is always active and thinking. So that is high proximity seeking, high anxiety. Or you can have right at the bottom people, children who have learned to shut off all negative emotions. This you will see particularly if any of you have the experience of working with children who grew up in traumatic situations. You notice that because of the high degree of violence in families, children who are very small, they shut out all the emotions completely, and we call it repression, to the extent that some of them even forget that they've had traumatic relationships. When I do my clinical practice and I work with young men and women in groups and they speak about some issue that they had in their growing up years, like maybe they were abused or something, or there was violence, some of them for the first time begin to recollect these memories. This is because as small children we don't have the ability to withstand crisis situations. It's not possible. As adults we can. So the human body by nature protects ourselves by repressing these memories and shutting them down. So we have people who have a dismissive style. So when they grow up into relationships, they are unable to recognize the emotions of the other person. So you go home and your wife is feeling upset and you just say, just pretend like nothing has happened, you won't pay attention to her, and then later she says, can't you see what is happening? I say, what's wrong with this? Nothing happening to you. That's called the dismissive style. You're constantly dismissive. Are you good with this? Right? So these are possible attachment styles that we develop as we grow up in our early life. And then of course there are some of us, the lucky few I guess, who have very secure attachment styles, and therefore our sense of maturity in relationship is also very good. So keep this at the back of your mind. Remember, go back to my previous slide on the human brain. So if you're wired in early life to be fearful, that wiring gets reinforced and you tend to transmit that in other relationships as you grow up. Similarly, if you're wired to be dismissive and the nervous system is more dismissive in style, then as you grow older, you tend to be more dismissive. Do you get the drift here? More or less? So this is one understanding that we need to have. So if the first secret that was that, all our attachments, both in our young life and in our future life or present life that we're leading, is related to, is connected to the emotional brain. The second secret that's important for us to remember is that our early attachments always predict future attachments. Virginia, I'm now fast forwarding. So I spoke about what happens early on in life. And you know what? If I ask any of you what was your attachment style when you were growing up, it takes a while for us to recollect, because we are not like scientists and psychologists always thinking and talking about all this. So we are not aware of it, but some of us are. But it's important for us to pause and stop and ask ourselves, what is my style of attachment in my current relationship? Am I dismissive? Do I tend to avoid feelings and emotions and not pay attention to my partner? Am I always in a state of fear? What will happen in this relationship? Am I always thinking and getting preoccupied with what is going on? Or do I have a sense of safety and security? Virginia Satire, the lady you see on this slide, is a well-known experiential family therapist, someone that I respect a lot and has done a lot of work with couples and families. And she's in the previous slide, right? And I'm going to share with you some secrets from the research that she has done with couples, especially couples who are in conflict. If you're in a close and intimate relationship, so a close and intimate relationship is perhaps with your spouse, with your father, mother, brother, sister, partner that you're seeing and so on. The way you function in that relationship, usually, for most people, there is one dominant style in which we function. Okay, I'm going to take you very briefly through some of these styles. One of the most common styles, which is happening to a third of people, is called by Virginia Satir through her research. This is validated world over, both in India, Asia, Africa, everywhere, when we work with couples, is what is known as the blamer. And I can see some of you are smiling, so maybe you are identifying yourself as being the blamer. Blamers always find fault, alright? And they don't accept responsibility for themselves. Why do they do that? What's the emotional, secret there? Because they're trying to hide a feeling of loneliness and alienation. That's important for us to understand. When we work with couples, if someone's a blamer in a relationship, my wife is like this, she doesn't listen to me, my husband is like that, he doesn't pay, he's responsible. We always try to focus away from the blame and look at within yourself and ask, why are you doing this? And one of the reasons why we do that is because we cannot face the sense of loneliness and alienation that we ourselves are going through in our lives. So we tend to blame. That's the blamer. I'm going to quickly run through due to paucity time. Then there is a group of people who are known as the placaters. You remember the teddy bear that we used to have when we were children? We used to hold on to it when I'm feeling upset. Placaters are persons who always try to please the other person. So if there's a conflict, we'll probably always say, it's okay, you'll be okay, don't worry. People pleasers. This is one method in which we avoid conflict. Just before the session, we were having a discussion about conflicts, right? And avoiding conflicts. So placaters are normally non-assertive. I'm a little bit like a placater myself. They try to avoid conflict. And they're always worried about how others will perceive them. So even if you have a problem with your partner, you will not talk about it. You will withdraw, you'll be quiet, you'll please the person, you'll do things for the person, and you'll continue to do that till perhaps one day everything will just explode like that, because you're piling up a lot of burden within yourself. It's called the gunny sacking response. Suddenly just bursts out and everything comes out. So that's a placater. If you think placating is a good method of dealing with conflicts, you're mistaken. It isn't, because it takes a toll later on. Third, the computer. All of us, those intellectual people, right, who use the head a lot in relationship. So people who believe that navigating human relationship is like writing a doctoral dissertation. Everything can be figured out very clearly. The computers are very rational about everything. Everything is programmed very clearly. And we've had some very interesting people in psychotherapy who function that way. And they always think they're right. So normally the computer brains are people who hide a sense of vulnerability. I've seen this strangely in a lot of men. And there is some research to show that men have a tendency to, function like the computer style. Virginia Satir earlier used to call this as the super reasonable style of communication. Right? And so we believe and think that human relationships should be very rational and be more like a textbook or preaching in a relationship and telling our partner, this is how you should be, don't be emotional, don't cry, what is there, it's no big deal, blah, blah, and so on. But you and I know that doesn't work. Then you have the distractors. Distractors are persons who are like, little bit like a combination of the fearful, preoccupied, and the dismissive all put together. And we often try to seek attention to compensate for our feelings of loneliness. So have you had this experience? Now all of us are attention seeking, right? Is there anybody who doesn't like attention here? All of us like some attention, right? We thrive on attention. But one of the ways in which distractors function in adult relationships is by seeking attention. So they might go out of their way to seek attention by doing things for the partner, or and that is not just to just to improve the relationship. It's by actually to hide the vulnerability that you will feel otherwise, because if you might be guided by a fear of abandonment, or that you might be left without being loved and so on, and so you want to constantly seek attention in a relationship. relationship. Now, all what I've said so far, some of you in the audience may be thinking, yeah, I'm a little bit like that, or I have a little bit of all of them. That's true, all of us have a little bit of all of this, but the important thing in human relationships is to recognize whether we're using any of these consistently to the extent that our relationships are not fully functioning. That's important, right? And some of us use this quite a bit to drive all our relationships. Then I would say, stop and think about what you're doing. Virginia Satir believes that the leveler is perhaps the kind of person who is more balanced and can kind of manage situations effectively. They have good problem-solving skills. So the leveler will be consistent with the secure attachment style here. The leveler there is consistent with the secure attachment style because you know the limits of your relationship. You know that sometimes things can go wrong, sometimes things may not go wrong, and this is what you need to do. The final story that I want to spin to you about is a research that was done by another famous anthropologist called Harriet Lerner. Incidentally, she spent some years in Delhi doing her research early on in life, and she worked predominantly with women in intimate relationship. Harriet Lerner has produced a classic called The Dance of Anger. That's the book called The Dance of Anger, and speaks about relational styles. Now, so far I spoke about different attachment styles or attachment patterns and communication stances, which is respective to one particular person, right? So let's take me as the example, and let's take my wife as another example. Let's say that I am, what do you want me to be? Which attachment style do you want me to be? Dismissive? Okay. So I'll be dismissive, and let's say my wife is, what? Fearful? What happens when you get a fearful attachment style and a dismissive attachment style together? Okay? So imagine the permutations and combinations possible for each one of us in this room. It's not just about ourselves, it's also about our partners. Right? And in different relationships, you might meet persons with different style. So in one relationship, you met someone who's very fearful, and that person was always clinging on to you because of fear. In another relationship, you meet someone who is dismissive, and the person doesn't even care about your emotions. You get me here? And we think that everybody should be the same. Harriet Lerner's contribution is about how people function when they are together. And she spent a lot of time in the Papua New Guinea islands, where there are 3 tribal groups. And in one of the tribal groups, was matriarchal, one was patriarchal, one was different, and she studied and looked at how they all dealt with conflict. And she has contributed some very interesting research about how we function in individuals. I'm only going to share, I think I have 5 minutes more, around 5 minutes more. I'm only going to share some examples of what she said. You put 2 people together in a human relationship, one possibility is what is known as the pursuer-distancer combination. So if you are in a relationship and you want that relationship to sustain, let's say you're fearful about the relationship breaking down, what you normally do is you will always go after the other partner to make sure that the relationship is okay. So you are the pursuer, you're always pursuing, right? The other partner is not like that. The other partner does not like people pursuing you. Kind of feel suffocated, you kind of feel you're being cleaned up on. So what will that person do? Distance. So pursuer is pursuing like this, the distancer is moving away. You get that? Harriet Lerner calls this a dance. It's called the dance of anger. Then if the pursuer stops pursuing, then the distancer stops and then thinks, what's going on now? This person has stopped pursuing me, so maybe the distancer will start going back and opening up. Then the pursuer will get very excited and then come back and start pursuing again. This dance goes on for a long time, and there are psychological reasons why we do that, why we can't resolve conflicts, because we have not understood how the needs of a pursuer and distancer should be reframed so that you can function more effectively. Another very common relationship pattern is called the over-functioner and the under-functioner. I had a couple that I was seeing very early on in my clinical practice, and the father in that family used to do everything for the wife and the daughter, including cooking the food, planning the travel, everything. To the extent that the wife and the daughter became very dependent on him. So he was working with a textile company where he had to travel. So when 2 days before he had to travel somewhere, both the wife and the daughter will fall terribly ill. And then he has to cancel this travel plan. This was happening all the time continuously. Every month whenever he had to travel, the wife and the daughter would fall sick. This was because he was functioning as an over-functioner, someone who's like doing everything in the relationship, and they were like under-functioning, not doing anything at all. This is another interesting dance of anger or dance of conflict or dance of relationship that you will see in families. What does this understanding about human relationship, human styles of functioning and so on lead to? And why is it that in spite of all this knowledge and understanding, we still continue to have trouble in relationships? That is answered, I think, by a concept that I've been kind of talking for quite some time now, called thinking viruses. Now, all of us know that we can have a viral fever, right? A virus can come and affect us. But have you heard of viruses that affect our thinking? So let me go back right to the first slide here. When the emotional brain develops, the emotional brain begins to develop what is known as some ways in which we gauge the world around us. So if your father was constantly criticizing you, you might develop a thought that I am no good. Are you with me here? I am no good. So when you grow up and when your teacher talks to you and says, you know what, young man, you haven't done your homework today, and criticizes you, that pattern, that thought that you had earlier, that you are no good, comes back into your mind. Although your teacher has told you very often that you're good in other things, just this one particular statement by the teacher triggers off this thought that you developed when you were growing up. I'm no good. This is an example of what we call as thought virus. And thought viruses evolve because of the lag between the emotional brain and the thinking brain. What are some of the most common thought viruses that affect all of us in relationships? There are quite a lot, but I put a few, and maybe some you can just reflect and see if you have some of them. Overgeneralization is when there's one or two things that have happened in your life or in a relationship, and you think that happens all the time, everywhere. So if your partner forgets to buy something, or you say forgets all the time, that's called an overgeneralization. Very often in relationships we do that. We tend to overgeneralize based on one or two incidents, and we think that is how it's going to be for the rest of our life. Another thought virus is called extremism, or it's also called magnification. Let's say there's one thing that's happened to you in your relationship, right? You will magnify that and you'll blow it out of proportion. Right? You make a big story out of it. That's also a thought virus that many of us suffer from in our human relationships, right? So if someone has just cracked a joke about you in your relationship, you think about that particular joke, and then you think about it all the time, and you blow it out of proportion, and you think about it all the time, and then you get worried and upset and think, hey, your partner is always like that. That's called magnification. Like looking through a magnifying glass at one small blemish or one small error, and then thinking about that all the time. All of us have several thinking viruses which we need to detect and deal with. Another example is personalization. We feel that everything that happens around us is because of us. See, this happens a lot because of our early childhood, because children always think that they are responsible for anything that goes wrong between the parents. If you're familiar with divorce and separation, and you have children who've been there, they'll always believe that they are responsible for the parents getting divorced. It's a common childhood, pattern of functioning. Same thing happens in human relationships. We begin to think that it is because of you that the other person is behaving like that. So what are the examples here? he's in a bad mood at work. So if you call your spouse or your partner at work and he or she responds to you, say in a short word or something like that, you think that the person is in a bad mood. Maybe the person is in a bad mood. Then you will think immediately that it is because of you. You are responsible for that person being in a bad mood. This is called personalization. The fact that you always think that you are the reason why the other person is having a problem. Very often that is not the case. Negative labeling, another common thought virus that we go through, that we always label our partners. So if your partner is doing 100 good things and there's one or two bad things that the person does, and I've seen this example that I can get. I remember very clearly, it's a case that I was working with who were going through divorce. And do you know what the reason for divorce was? So I asked them how things are. They said they have a good time, everything's going so well and all that. There's only one reason why they wanted to divorce. Because the husband, when he comes home, he'll remove his shoe and he'll take the socks and then he'll throw it in the living room. That was the only reason why they wanted to divorce. Really, that was the only reason. That was so irritating for the wife. And the wife would always say, you are so clumsy. You are so, you don't care for others. You are not neat. But actually that gentleman was otherwise quite okay. This was the only thing he was doing. That's negative labeling. You take one or two things. And you know that none of us are perfect partners, right? Everybody does something annoying. When you're in a relationship, the first few days, because the emotional brain is overactive, will not see any of the blemishes of the partner. They'll only see good things. You think your partner is like an angel and the most beautiful and handsome person in the whole world and all that. After a few days, what happens? The thinking brain begins to come in and say, oh, he did this, he did that, he didn't pay attention to me, he's criticizing me, he ignored me and things like that. Then you start having problems. This is also a virus. I'm calling it a virus because these are not true about relationships on the whole. Finally, I think this is the last example that I've put for thinking viruses. Emotional reasoning. This again goes back to the development of the emotional brain. If we don't feel right, the situation is wrong and something or someone is responsible. Some of you are probably sitting here in the audience or you're talking to somebody, you wake up one morning and you kind of feel out of place, you don't feel too good, you're feeling depressed. You begin to start making judgments about life and about yourself from that particular feeling. Many of us do that, especially those of us who have what is known as a depressogenic personality. Based on emotions and how we feel, we tend to judge our relationships. This is wrong because our emotions don't decide the nature of a relationship. The nature of a relationship is decided by the evaluation of both the partners about each other holistically. So if any of you are going through any of these thinking viruses, and if you look up onto the internet and search for cognitive distortions or thinking errors, you'll find a whole list there and you find questionnaires that you can answer. It's high time that you met a doctor and got rid of these viruses. Because the more these viruses infest our thinking about our partners and about our relationships, they're only going to perpetuate, lack of health. I'm going to wind up with a concept from emotional intelligence, very well-known concept popularized by a psychologist, journalist called Daniel Goleman. Have you heard of Daniel Goleman? Emotional intelligence, classic bestseller. His thesis is that we need to train our emotional brain using our thinking brain. So I showed you those two types of brains, right? The emotional brain and the thinking brain. Which one grows first? The emotional brain. Yeah, I know how many of you are listening. And then the thinking brain. But the thinking brain is the brain that grows later, but the thinking brain has the ability to manage the emotional brain. Many of us still remain with the emotional brain and emotionally reason our way through situations. Although emotions are important, it's important for us to use the thinking brain to manage those emotions. Usually, this was not a problem in previous generations because our parents, grandparents, joint family system, they all used to help us to manage our emotions. And so even without our knowledge, our thinking brain was being conditioned to help us to manage ourselves. Today, many of us don't have that liberty. We don't have people to help us. We don't have mentors. Our mentors are usually Facebook or social media or some peers who themselves are not sure about how to manage emotions and so on, right? So it's important for us to be emotionally intelligent. And do any of you identify with any of these types here? People who have low emotional intelligence normally tend to be argumentative, don't listen to your partner, kind of outbursts, emotional outbursts from time to time, blame others. But what emotional intelligence tells us is stop, use your thinking brain to learn how to manage yourself by first knowing about yourself. So the secrets that I try to unlock for you today, the secret about identifying your attachment style, the secret about the emotional brain, right? The secret about your communication pattern with your partners. Be aware of them. Accept it. If you are someone who is a blamer, stop and think about it and do something about it. Stop being a blamer. Address that emotion that's making you to be a blamer. Do that. That is what Goldman says by self-awareness and self-management. Be able to control yourself by using the thinking brain. Since all of us, this topic is about human relationships, it's important for us to recognize that social awareness or working with others is important. If you're like an eccentric scientist who's always sitting in a laboratory and working with inanimate objects, you don't have to worry about human relationships. You just have to worry about fears that you have in your life. And if you can take that first step of self-awareness, and if you can cross that step, then you have unlocked the greatest mystery of a human relationship. I think the best solution for all of us when it comes to tackling human relationships is the ability to forgive yourself for what you have gone through as an individual and then forgive others. Over 4,000 couples were interviewed by John Gottman, one of the most leading family therapists in the world. And the single most important factor that resolved problems in human relationship was not mediation, it was not communication skills training, it was not soft skills training, it was not reading a great book, it was your ability to forgive your partner and your ability to forgive yourself for what you have gone through in your life. Thank you very much for your patient listening, and I'll be happy to take some questions.
What a wonderful coverage of a very, very complicated subject. And I'm very sure that the language and the ease by which he has presented must have really gone deep into your mind, both into the emotional part of the brain and also in thinking part of the brain. So trigger the questions and please ask questions.
Lucid and illuminating talk on relationships. My question is a little off from actually the topic, more dealing with rather than interpersonal relationships in terms of motivation and as we as educators and students. Could you give us some tips on what would be the line to motivate students towards performance?
Dr. Rebecca, your question is really not related to what I spoke today, but I guess I will speak a little bit about motivating students, because it's getting harder over the years now to get students and motivating them to perform. And there's a couple of places from where I want to answer this question. One of the most successful methods in which we can motivate students comes from our understanding of how students perceive us as teachers. And across the board, across educational settings, right from primary up to higher education, one thing that has really stood out is that if you ask students who are the kind of teachers that really inspired you, or who are the kind of teachers that you would remember the most, they would say these are teachers who had time for me and who respected me and was available for me and treated me with as an individual and so on. And something that we pick from that is that it's not really our expertise in the subject matter, but our willingness and availability to be open to students and to demonstrate to them that we care for them has served as a great source of motivation for students. The other line of thinking that we have in higher education, I mean both K-12 and higher education research, is that as the generations are changing, now we've moved from generation X, Y, Z, millennials, and now we're working with post-millennials, right? So if you're working with kids who are born after 2000, post-millennials, is that we have not really understood the learning styles and what works for them. So very often teachers tend to wear the hat of judgment and try to mold them into the way that we think they should be. So it's really important for us to sit down and understand how they function as individuals. We know that they're very technology savvy, we know that they have a lot of information, we also know that they're very distracted, they don't pay much attention, but they still respond to basic human affections of attention, respect and so on. A large research done in the United States with a mentoring group called the large mentoring group in the United States found that when they interviewed young people, they asked, what is it that you find most important for you as a growing up student or as, in your school or college? They said the fact that we had a mentor whom we could go to even when we had embarrassing situations in life. One of the things about post-millennials is that it looks like they don't need our help, but deep inside, when they have trouble, they really want and take our help. So one message, I guess, that's coming out of this rant of mine is that we need to continue to be teachers who are available and demonstrate care for them. But somehow what happens is that because we want them to, function in a particular way because of our own generation or how we function and our lack of understanding of learning style, we are unable to connect with them. And they are not really looking for teachers who will also be like them and speak the lingo that they speak and so on. They're quite okay if you are old-fashioned, but still they want us to be, people who demonstrate that they care. Another research evidence that we have about motivating young people actually comes from the research on emotional intelligence itself, which I was speaking about. Our ability to manage the emotions in a relationship with students. And building on that, we have something called the strength-based approach. As a teacher, do you know what is the strength of your student? And are you able to harness that? So if I asked all the teachers here, I'm not going to ask you, but how many of us are teachers here? Alright, some of us are teachers here. So if you asked yourself, and you have hundreds of students that you work with, right? If you asked yourself, do I know the top 3 strengths of my student? And have I used that in working with them? Then you will get a very good driver for motivating students to perform. But that requires a personal understanding of students. And I also want to conclude by saying, if students don't respond to you when you are giving them a bit of advice, or if you're sharing with them a story that motivates them, if it looks like they're not responding to you, it's okay. Because that's one of the learning styles of post-millennials. The response styles are not necessarily, yes ma'am, yeah I understood, I'm so helped, thank you so much for helping me, my life has changed and now I'm a better person. They don't do that. But it impacts them. It impacts them. So don't go by how they respond. You ask them after 3 years after they graduate, when they come back, you talk to them. They'll tell you everything that you wanted to hear now. And that's true about the young people. It's only by the age of 25, 26, 27 that many of us actually begin to recognize the impact that elders have had on us, and we have the ability to go back and say thank you for that. Till then we just don't do it. Right? That's the truth. So if you're doing your best to motivate and you're putting in your extra efforts to work with them, you show them that you care for them, then I said 90% of the things you're doing right in terms of motivating them. I think the rest is a matter of time. Thank you. Yes,
Sir. Okay. Sir, I want to ask that you showed a mind map initially in your slides, second or third slide. Some mind maps are there in which a pattern of brain was there. That from 0 to 3 years or 3 to 20 years, minds are formed in a particular manner.
Yes.
Sir. So, sir, I want to know that many of the people, they're troubled life they have been through. So, can their mind maps be changed in a positive manner afterwards?
Yes, I'm just trying.
Yes, you showed some minds, blue color.
Yeah, it was some fMRI pictures, right?
Yes,
this one, right?
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
All right.
So if they've been into troubled childhood because of their parents, and afterwards they realize that what is wrong with them, can it be changed?
Yes, absolutely. Otherwise, the whole talk here is useless, right? It's like determined to be in some form.
And how it is done, please.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So this is actually the set of images, neuro-imaging techniques to see the growth of a brain between 5 years to 20 years to show how the brain evolves. And what is good about these images is that it shows that the brain can be changed or molded. Concept of neuroplasticity, which I spoke about, right? Suppose you are the child, you are coming to me at the age of 10 and you had experienced some trauma, you had some traumatic memories and so on, and you're coming to me for counseling, all right? And I sit and work with you professionally, and then I look at the ways in which your neural networks are formed. Every close interaction that a child has with an adult or two persons have with each other over a sustained period of time changes the wiring in the brain, right? So if you're familiar with electrical wiring systems, many of you engineers and all that here, you can actually change the wiring. So in the past, people used to say molding of the brain is possible only when the person is very small, and once you've grown up, you're fixed for life and all that. That's not true anymore. You can change even if you're older. It is just that as you grow older, it takes a little more time to change, because we're using a thinking brain a lot and we are saying, I'm not like this, I'm okay, the other person is fault. We have so many thought viruses and filters. But if you're open to change, then you can successfully change the way people think and believe about themselves. So that is definitely possible, no doubt about it. But sometimes you need some professional guidance on that. But some people change even on their own. I know of people who've read a self-help book, figured things out, reflected about it, and they've practiced it. One of the prerequisites for change and rewiring the human brain is constant practice. Just knowing that I am a dismissive person in my relationship will not change me. I have to then practice behaviors of not being dismissive. So I have to communicate to my partner consistently. I have to go through that experience. Then the brain changes. There's also research, neuroimaging was done on people who are going through counseling sessions, and they'll put these, these fMRI scans or SPECT scans and look at the brain, and they saw that before the counseling, after 20 hours of counseling, the brain has actually changed. So it's possible to do that, definitely. And that's why I want all of you here to start working on it yourselves, including myself. If we are navigating difficulties in relationships, let us do something about it. But behaviorally, we have to practice. Did I kind of answer your question? Thank you.
Hello.
One second. Can I just take her question and then take your question? We'll come back to you. I'll just share what the professor here asked, if somebody is blaming you all the time, either at work or in any situation, and it's constantly affecting you, and you can't do anything about it, and you're not able to balance what you do, right? Right. So it's a question about how we deal with situations that are hard for us to change. Situations are the same. In a way, you answered the question yourself when you said, how do we balance the thinking and the emotional brain? I'd introduce the concept of coping skills here, because one of the important aspects about Goldman's work on emotional intelligence is that we need to be fully aware of the limitations of our social situation. So let us take my example. I'm a dean at a university, and let's say that I'm constantly blaming one of the teachers because she's not performing well. I am the reason for the problem, and objectively somebody analyzes, she's doing well. So every day she's coming to work and I'm blaming, you are responsible because of you, like that, right? So what can she do about it? That's a question. She will need to find ways in which she can perhaps communicate to me in a different way. Perhaps sometimes present her case, have a talk with me and explain without making me feel threatened or like without stimulating my ego more, to present her situation to me. If not, speak to somebody else. If not, learn a better way of coping, not to personalize what I say. So every day when she goes to work, she's aware that, okay, this dean really doesn't like me, and I can expect him to say something negative about me. But that's not who I am, right? So that's called acceptance of a situation without personalizing it. There are some situations in our lives which we just cannot change, right? Because the situation is a constant, so the only person who can change is us. So, and go back to what I said earlier, if one option has not worked, think of another option that might work to manage yourself and your emotions. It's good to have friends to talk to, it's good to have a confidant to share with. Many people find that a relief because human ecosystem is very useful. We cannot fight our battles alone, so if you have a trusting relationship of somebody else, that could be an outlet for us. So we'll have to figure out some ways in which we solve that problem. What you should not do is to go back home and think of yourself as lower than you are because of that person blaming you all the time. Why is that person blaming you? Not because of you. Because of him. He has got some thought virus, he's got some problem, he's probably a dismissive style of person. Maybe he grew up like that, having a very critical parent, he's taking it out on you. So all of us reflect to others what we are. Other people are always a mirror of our reflection, really. So if you have that awareness in your mind, it will reduce the burden that you are carrying about that person. Can you speak from there? I think I should be able to. Really, it's a tough situation because what the gentleman here is asking is, you're always in a relational construct and one person is more aware than the other person, right? One person is more aware than the other person. So a person who's more aware is doing everything to kind of make the relationship work. It's something like the over-functioner, under-functioner kind of a thing that happens. Unless the under-functioner is able to be aware and open to this, to your intervention, she, in this case, we may conclude, will continue to filter you not as someone who is trying to solve the problem, but might be filtering you as someone who is, maybe criticizing her style of functioning, finding fault with her, and so on. So it's a tough situation that you're in. A third party sometimes helps, some kind of mediation helps. Sometimes, but what might actually help, which you can try if this is related to somebody you know or your friend or someone, is to ask yourself, are you creating a safe environment to have this conversation? One thing that works is to tell the other person beforehand itself, I'm not finding fault with you. I appreciate the things that you did. This is how I feel about, how you come across. Speak about some of the strengths of that person, because for all human relationships, the vulnerability is very high. If someone tries to correct or change or something like that, immediately we begin to get into defenses and we close up, and then it's like fighting against a brick wall. So if you can tell her, some of the things that you like about her and how she is as a person and the positive things that she does in the relationship and how she contributes to it, and then say that I would feel much happier or I would feel better if you behaved like, if you said this to me or if you did this to me. I really want to have a conversation with you. I'm not blaming you. These kind of conversations and the structuring of our sentences sometimes is very helpful. Because what you're trying to do is, you're not creating an unsafe and insecure environment for her. You're first making the environment very secure for her by appreciating her strengths and the fact that, affirming the love that you have for her, and then speak about it. You can try that. And that, over a period of time, that should work in most cases.
0 to 6 years, and ADHD is a big problem in the world. Awareness about ADHD is very low in India, and because of iron deficiency. So, sir, does it affect how we behave in the future?
The question that the gentleman, thank you. The question that the gentleman is asking is about a particular behavioral condition called attention deficit hyperactivity, which affects many children nowadays. It's a neurodevelopmental condition where your attention is affected, you're very hyperactive. And as you grow older, you have what is known as residual attention deficit. That is, your question is whether that can affect relationships, right? Sure. Yeah. There are lots of conditions in the neurodevelopmental conditions which can affect your relationship. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder usually subsides with the right kind of treatment. It usually subsides over a period of time. But as we grow older, we can have what is known as residual attention deficit. It is also known to be linked with learning disabilities. It is also linked to impulsivity. So normally in attention deficit, if you are taking the right treatment either through medication or psychotherapy, the impulsivity reduces. But if it is not taken care of, that impulsivity can continue in future relationships, and because of that impulsivity, you can have problems in your life.
For your informative and counseling session. My question, actually two parts of this question. First I want to ask, is there any threshold for forgiveness? Fifth secret you told. And second, I want, if the person is defensive sort of person, has to live in a dominating situation continuously, then how should she or he behave not to change his personality? What should the priority or the first thing she should or he should keep in the mind to handle that situation? Because personality is totally different. The person is defensive type and the situations are dominating type. So,
let me see if I understood your question correctly. You have a relationship, there are two people. One person is dominating and very defensive, so the other person is probably bearing the brunt of it,
yeah,
correct?
Yeah.
And then, how long can you forgive that person?
Yeah.
Right, that's your question?
Yeah.
Is there a threshold?
Okay.
That's a good question. It's very similar to another question that was asked earlier. If one person is willing to change, but the other person isn't, what do you do? Right? If human relationships have to be successful, it's important that both the parties invest in that relationship. And it's not possible sometimes for us to change the other person, right? And forgiveness is not so much about forgiving the other person all the time continuously and saying it's okay, you did this to me, it's okay. That is self-sacrifice. That is not forgiveness. Forgiveness is identifying what is the impact of living with this man or woman in my life, how much it is hurting me, and whether I have examined that hurt, I am willing to forgive myself for having, if I have contributed to that, and then whether I am now ready to take the step to see what I can do for this relationship. One thing I can do for this relationship, like I was speaking to the gentleman who was talking to me earlier, is I can try to create a situation where I speak with him, communicate, and so on. Then that may not work, because some people are not willing to be aware. That is why third parties come and mediate, and they come and talk and help people to get awareness. Then you have to ask yourself, if you have done your best, what is the next thing that I should do? That's a tough one, especially in our country, where sometimes relationships are socially constructed. It's not very easy for us to take the step of changing the relationship, even in terms of separation or moving out and things like that. It is not something that we value in our culture. But sometimes the other person might be so rigid that it is very hard for us to live with that person. So there again, I would say, look at alternatives that you have, people that you can talk to. Safeguard yourself against the impact of that person. Stop blaming yourself for the weaknesses of that person. Don't develop some thought viruses yourself because of that particular person. I find this particularly difficult when it comes to working in abusive relationships. In abusive relationships, very often one of the partners is so much victimized and helpless that he or she is unable to do anything about it. The only prescription that we sometimes give is remove the person from that relationship. But removing the person from that relationship is easier said than done. But I think as a society and as a culture, some of these questions that you're asking is also a responsibility for all of us as parents, elders, teachers, educators, to create conditions for people to go to when they have trouble. Like if any of our students here or staff here has these kind of challenges and difficulties, have we created certain conditions where they can go and seek some help, get some redressal? That could be a small step that can make a big difference in our lives. So, as much as some of these questions have no clear miraculous answers in psychology, because it has to do, if they have to change, both persons have to see the relevance of change. But still there's something that we can do as society to, create spaces for people like them to work. So that's my kind of short answer. One second, sir. I just want to say that when you ask questions, remember that a lot of your questions may be coming from a particular unique situation. And sometimes these unique situations may have some better solutions if you talk to somebody uniquely about it. So I will only give some general responses.
Tony, the way the technology is progressing, we know that the time is coming that the knowledge can be directly transformed into our brain. And people have already conceived the mechanism by which the entire content of a big book or a monograph can be transferred to the brain. So you don't have to read the book, but the content is there, so you can recall. If this is true, in the childhood, if the non-violence of Gandhi or those who turn into terrorists or fidayeen, if these kind of elements actually put into the brain at the childhood, don't you think that the violence-free society will be there in the future?
Difficult for me to predict that.
Is it utopian or it's real? I don't know.
Difficult for me to predict that kind of outcome, but what I can say is that there is some research in artificial intelligence and robotics now that is looking at how human emotions can be, infused early on. And if you go by what neuroscience tells us about the emotional brain and the variations, if what you said helps in creating neural networks that can improve empathy, that can improve coping and resilience and so on, then it's possible. So we can conjecture that.
More research should be done in that direction.
Yes.
Maybe one or two last questions, and we are reaching 5 o'clock. Time the bus leaves.
clinical psychologist. And she's still living with me. I will bring her next time for the presentation. But that's a good question. Whenever I do these marriage classes, they always ask me. But I tell them, no marriage is perfect, right? No marriage is perfect, so it's important to... In fact, the textbook of marriage counseling that we used to read in our course was written by a couple who themselves separated, and then it's important for all others to kind of practice and work on.
Okay, I think this is the time to really thank for a very lucid and very thought-provoking lectures, explanation that you have given. In fact, this is absolutely a very new topic in the series of meeting of minds. So on behalf of ITM University management, on behalf of the faculty and students, on my behalf, I thank you very much for spending your time, accepting my invitation and